Welcome to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point podcast. Our podcasts are designed to bring a conversational exploration of key topics that we believe will provide value and insight to those serving in the nonprofit sector. We will highlight new developments in the field, latest research, and things we're learning from our own clients that we can share. If there are topics that you would like to see explored, please send them to us through our website at jdlevyassociates.com.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in the Calibration Point podcast today. I'm excited to have Susan Trent with us from the Rothberg Law Firm. And Susan brings a unique perspective of having had the opportunity and continuing to have the opportunity to work in sunsetting foundations. For some of you, this term may be foreign. Some of you may have heard of it. I am super excited to learn more about why families think about sunsetting. So to create some buzz around that term, Susan, I'm going to just hand it over to you. Could you start us off with what in the world does sunsetting a foundation mean?
Sure. Well, I'm very glad to let the audience know that it's a fairly simple concept. It's essentially the foundation sunsets by the donor sets some predetermined time frame for when the assets of the foundation will be spent down to zero, gifted to zero, I should say. Also that the operations, the grant operations, the basic operations of a foundation will also cease. So it's essentially a defined amount of time. It can be 5 years, it can be 15 years, it could be 100 years, but that's all determined by the donor in the documents that establish the foundation. Okay, so we have a family who then has assets, and they have a foundation, or I'm assuming a trust even, that they're setting up, and they decide as a family or as an individual donor that within a certain time window, they want all of their assets to be liquidated and given out into the nonprofit sector. Am I interpreting that right so far? That's correct.
Okay. Then one question I would have, which I know some of our listeners would be curious on this, for those that are sunsetting, are you able to create a sunset foundation that has enough of an asset that remains that they could, say, continue to deploy a resource in the community? Let's say that there's a family member who has great marketing abilities, and they want to offer that pro bono to just nonprofit organizations indefinitely. Are foundations able to do that as part of sunsetting, or is that a no-no according to the IRS because it's not making a grant any longer?
Well, what I would say with a sunsetting foundation is that just like a non-sunsetting foundation, that donative intent is very important. Obviously, okay. A foundation that remains still primarily a grant-making entity. And okay. So the idea is that you're going to make grants to organizations that are consistent with donative intent. Right. Now, caveat to what we talked about is in some cases, you can almost have a hybrid foundation, in a sunsetting foundation, in the sense that a sunsetting foundation can say, we want to sunset, but we are also supportive of some of our grant-making dollars going to endowments, okay, or scholarship funds, or something that will have life beyond the sunset.
Interesting.
The assets though are transferred from the foundation to that entity. So one of the things that is, and we'll probably get into some of the things, the pros and cons of a sunset foundation, is that what we're seeing in this space is that philanthropists in a sunsetting foundation really want to see their dollars go externally to nonprofit organizations with whom they're familiar, rather than utilizing foundation assets for things that may be beneficial to the community, but constitute overhead to the foundation.
So it sounds like, from what you're saying, that at least one characteristic of the donors who have an interest in sunsetting is that they seem to be pretty disciplined and focused on donor intent and carrying out their desires as they've created the foundation. Would that be accurate?
That would be accurate. What I would say is and again, this is a generalization, and there certainly could be exceptions. But what I'm seeing in this space is most of these donors are individuals that built their businesses, built their careers, built their wealth from scratch.
Okay.
And they tend to be people who lived very frugally. There's that famous book about the mind of a millionaire, the millionaire next door. And these are folks that oftentimes fly under the radar in terms of the community's knowledge of both their interest in charitable causes, but also their accumulation of wealth. So they've lived their lives very, very frugally, and they tend to be very savvy business people. So this idea of maximizing dollars is extremely important to them. And really, they might can say maximizing dollars, but what they're really saying is we want impact.
So yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, so it sounds like these are donors who are really driven by the idea of social impact and creating life change around their interests and desires. And I like the connection you're identifying between very savvy business leaders who are carrying that into the public impact of their wealth, and then wanting to create a Sunset Foundation that can help ensure that that gets executed or delivered upon. Do you find, so that would be a couple characteristics. Maybe another question I would have about donors who do this. Do you find that these donors, how would you describe their interest in generational philanthropy if they decide to sunset? Like, how do they go about engaging other generations if, say, they've set a 50-year timeline on their foundation? How does that play out in these families or these donors?
Well, I would say that these donors are not necessarily concerned so much with generational giving. I think the duration of the sunsetting foundation is sometimes driven in part by the dollar amount of the assets that initially can fund the foundation. These folks are typically people who are concerned about organizational and mission creep. That is inherent to generational giving. And they tend to be people who feel that their success in their own personal lives was really dependent upon quality individuals doing what they say they're going to do.
Interesting.
And so I don't think generational giving for them is very top of mind. They want ROI as opposed to a focus on long-term charity.
Really interesting perspective. So I'm going to have you switch hats for a minute.
Okay.
And think with me about the nonprofit leader or the board member who's a part of our audience today. And they may be working with a Sunset Foundation, or they may have families that they work with or individual donors who fit some of these characteristics, which could very likely be someone who's setting up a sunsetted foundation. Do you have any advice or thoughts on how a nonprofit leader goes about working with a family or an individual that is kind of in this space or fits some of the characteristics that you're seeing of those who do set up sunset-based foundations?
Right. So I would say with what is consistent between a sunsetting foundation and a non-sunsetting foundation is that it's really important for nonprofit leaders to relationship build.
Okay.
Obviously understanding what any foundation holds out as its mission.
Right.
Critically important to understanding whether or not a nonprofit is eligible for the grants. And if so, what size of grant potentially? So obviously relationship building is really important. I would also say for a nonprofit that at least in my experience, I have not really seen nonprofits pay as much attention to the date of sunset as they probably would benefit from doing so.
Wow, that is a great nugget. Yeah, can you unpack that?
Sure. So what I'm finding with most sunset foundations is from the date of initiation to a certain period in time, most of them operate from a investment policy and grant making policy basis, just identical to a non-sunsetting foundation, being fiscally prudent, trying to preserve, gifting based on investment portfolio returns and those sorts of things, trying to be conscientious about maintaining the principal balance. You see that initially, but they're trying to figure out. Sometimes it's family members who have a say sort of in grant making over time. Other times it's professional advisors like banks and attorneys and investment managers that are set up as the directors. Sometimes it's a hybrid, but really from an operational standpoint, most of them function for quite a period of time, just like any other foundation.
Okay.
With a sunsetting foundation, as it nears the end, and when I say as it nears, it's probably 3 to 4 years at least, and maybe more with a larger foundation. In fact, I would say if you had a very large sunsetting foundation, you almost need to start your planning process from day one for what your sun is going to look like, or at least start thinking about it. When a sunsetting foundation starts to think about how it's going to wind up, one of the things is, of course, it has to gift its money out. Right. It has to set reserves, for example, for anticipated wind-up expenses and taxes, or those sorts of things. A sunsetting foundation may need to plan a little bit for market volatility, depending on how they hold their assets. But more importantly, I know in Fort Wayne, we've had sort of the last sunsetting foundation I was involved in was a 15-year foundation. Well, in that time period, Fort Wayne has sort of experienced and is experiencing this renaissance. So lots of capital campaign opportunities and capital planning and large projects and large ideas, large programming ideas, big opportunities. But what I'm seeing is that it's not so difficult with like a programming grant to give sort of a big impact grant at the end of a sunsetting foundation or somewhere in that wind-up period. It is tougher for a sunsetting foundation to give a conceptual capital grant to an organization because of the risk and of the capital project either not proceeding as envisioned or not proceeding at all.
Wow.
So there are ways to draft pledge agreements around that, but those really big projects really need to be thought about by nonprofits really far in advance if a nonprofit would like a sunsetting foundation to be able to participate in a way that makes sense for the foundation given its sunset.
So it sounds like not only could it be volatile, but it could also be very opportunistic if they understand that and can think long-term with a sunsetting foundation. And kind of what I'm hearing you say is, as they get into that final stretch, if they know that my organization, for example, is a strategy for them to create even greater impact as they wind down, that's a mutually beneficial relationship for them because there's less work for them to have to find the partner, but also then for me to know that we can maximize potentially even greater monetary gifts or grants from the foundation as they start to come into their home stretch in a sense. And
yeah. I mean, that collaboration with a sunsetting foundation is the opportunity for really creating planned impact. It's an unusual opportunity for a savvy nonprofit with vision.
That is a great way to capstone this. And it just, I think one key that everybody listening needs to take away is if they're thinking about foundation relationships, if they're in the grantsmanship space, adding into their research, being really clear, is this a sunsetting foundation? What is the timeline and where are they in that process of kind of making their way to the end game or the finish line of the foundation really should be front and center in their research.
Right.
And then ultimately the strategy.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, I never thought about that. That's really enlightening for me. I've just never really thought through the strategy of what a sunsetting foundation could bring to the table, but then also how your partnership could change if you have that understanding.
Right. And I think also, the other great thing about a sunsetting foundation, of course, is, I was involved with the sunsetting foundation through this, and I almost hate to say the word, but COVID. We're all sick of hearing about, but, nonprofits have been really, really struggling. And sunsetting foundations, because they have a sunset, and sometimes it has to do with when that sunset is going to occur. Is it 15 years? Is it 50 years? When is it actually going to happen on a calendar basis? But in emergency circumstances, given that the foundation trustees typically know that they are going to wind it down, what I've experienced is that they're very generous when it comes to emergency relief. And quite frankly, sometimes more so than what a non-sunsetting foundation can do because of its spending policies.
Right.
Which may be very different than what a sunsetting foundation can do in real time.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Really, really good point. So to kind of wrap us up, I think what I hear on the donor side is that definitely sunsetting donors have a little bit of a personality characteristic to them. They're high impact, maybe seems like very savvy, donor intent, and being able to connect with the ultimate outcomes that they want and a little less concerned about generational influence. But then on the nonprofit side, it seems that in the field, one of the big missed opportunities is we just don't understand enough about sunsetting foundations, why they approach this, and then just what the timeline is and how we can be a partner in their strategy.
Well, I would say, in my experience, there's a lot of philanthropists and generous individuals out there, but the sunsetting donor is an individual who is absolutely wanting to maximize every dollar to get it out into the community, into causes which they have probably meticulously researched over time and are particularly passionate about. Yep. And I just think they're great. And I think, you certainly needed a balance between perpetual foundations and sunsetting foundations. The ROI that's can be associated with a sunsetting foundation is really off the charts with careful planning. Right.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think we should all be concerned about impact. And it sounds like if we're serious about it, we have to better understand the sunsetting foundation and the donors behind them. And Susan, I so appreciate your time. This has been tremendously enlightening for me. I know our audience as well. And maybe we'll do a follow-up on, what are the family dynamics like for those that are parts of families in sunsets, and how do you get everybody on the same page when now it's not only a grant-making entity, but it's one that has a terminal date. I'm sure that can be exciting as well. Susan, so appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point podcast. If you have comments or ideas for future episodes, please reach out using the contact page on our website, jdlevyassociates.com.